Barry Allen first appeared as a comic character almost 70 years ago, and since then he's appeared in over 5,000 comic issues. He went from being the fastest man in the world to a founding member of the Justice League, to even battling gods and extraterrestrial beings. Believe it or not, Barry actually died at one point too, and his timeline got revamped too many times. Yeah, this is gonna be an interesting one. So let's start with the easy part, his childhood. Barry Allen grew up in a relatively normal household. His parents, Henry and Nora, loved him dearly, and Barry's youth was more or less uneventful. However, things weren't all peaches and cream when it came to the Allen household. You see, at some point during Barry's boyhood years, Nora and Henry were having trouble in their marriage. So much so that Nora even sought to divorce her husband. Little did young Barry know that this was the beginning of a long, strange journey for him. One fateful day, Nora sent Barry to the bookstore while she and Henry talked about their relationship. This was the same day that Barry won a spelling bee contest, so everything seemed to be going pretty well for him. But then, after his little trip to the bookstore, Barry came home to a rather gruesome scene. That's because he had just discovered that his mom's life had been taken. On top of that, the boy arrived just in time to see his father being arrested by the police. Now, this almost seems like an open and shut case. After all, it's easy to think that Henry might have done something he would regret, considering that he and Nora were having a rough patch. But curiously, Henry insisted that he was innocent. Of course, this left an undeniable mark on the young Barry, as this event pretty much left him obsessed with discovering the truth behind his mom's death. Despite the awful situation, Barry found a new home after the tragedy, with a cop named Daryl Fry taking Barry in as his own son. Daryl was a decent, nice fellow who provided the boy with some very much needed guidance growing up. On the other hand though, it's also kind of awkward once you find out that Daryl was actually Nora's lover leading up to her untimely end. In any case, Barry grew up to be a good guy, all things considered. But as we mentioned, Nora's passing and Henry's arrest left Barry with an insatiable obsession to find out what actually happened to his mom that night. So, when he came of age, Barry decided to join the Central City Police Force as a forensic scientist, all in hopes of discovering who truly ended his mother's life. Not long after that, Barry had a rude awakening when Henry, his father, straight up confessed that he was the one who actually killed Nora all those years ago. Understandably enough, this information traumatized Barry. One fateful, stormy night, all the rages and sadness welling up inside Barry prompted him to tear through his lab at Central City PD. All of a sudden, a bolt of lightning struck Barry and inadvertently covered him with chemicals in his forensic lab. Ultimately, this accident rendered Barry comatose for months. And as if that wasn't bad enough, this happened on the same evening that Barry was supposed to have a date with a lovely reporter named Iris West. So yeah, things really weren't going so well for the man. It would take 4 months for Barry to regain consciousness. In fact, Barry himself was shocked to find out that he had just woken up from an otherwise life-threatening condition. But what was more shocking was when he discovered that the accident had given him super speed. Of course, suddenly discovering that you have superhuman abilities comes with it its own set of problems, and it took Barry some time to get accustomed to them. Also, it didn't take long for Barry to find out that even the clothes he wore weren't sufficient to keep up with his newfound speed. So once he figured that out, Barry produced garbs that would be able to handle the strain of his powers. Firstly, he crafted a pair of boots using Wayne Enterprises fighter-proof material he got from Central City's fire department. Now, clad in new gear, Barry then attempted to benchmark his top speed. So, as you'd expect from the man who would one day be known as The Flash, Barry ran. In fact, Barry ran so fast that he accidentally ended up in the future. To be specific, Barry found himself stuck in an alternate version of the future where Central City was ruled by a villain named the Turtle. On top of that, he also met his future self. Of course, this freaked Barry out. Thankfully though, his future self was able to help him, after which the two speedsters joined forces to take on some of the Turtle's goons. And props to future Barry too, because he helped our guy return to his original timeline with the help of a device called the Cosmic Treadmill. Now, back in the present, Barry swore never to run again in order to avoid similar things happening in the future. So everything looked like it was coming back to normal. Iris even got in touch with him again to set up another date. Barry's otherwise romantic meeting with Iris almost didn't happen though. That's because Barry immediately found out that the Turtle from his original timeline had started wreaking havoc in Central City. So, Barry decided to deal with this villain first before showing up to his and Iris's date. Ultimately, Barry and Iris's relationship went well and the two became a couple. And I can't stress this enough, Iris is hands down one of the most important characters in the Flash's life. In fact, it was Iris who convinced Barry to use the Flash's image as a beacon of hope for Central City, once she eventually found out that he was the speedster. In the meantime though, Barry had no choice but to step in and rescue Iris yet again, when a lowlife named Clive Yorkin attempted to gun her down. Barry's super speed was enough to save her, but he ended up with a bullet in his chest during the process. Barry went straight back to his apartment to remove the slug from his body, where Iris soon followed to have a talk with him. It all pretty much worked out, because Barry was able to deal with his wound. And more strikingly, he and Iris became an official couple after this. Their relationship, though, was in for a rocky start. That's because, in spite of his newfound powers, Barry still had the never-ending obsession to get to the bottom of his mother's case. And to make matters worse, he also had to deal with the turtle throughout all of this. Later, the turtle from the alternative future teamed up with the turtle from the present, and together, they kidnapped Iris. So, of course, it fell on Barry's hands to save his better half, and for the first time, Barry Allen donned his iconic red and gold suit as he formally took on the mantle of the Flash. In the end, the Flash was able to put a stop to both versions of the turtle with the help of Central City citizens. On top of that, he got to rescue Iris and put this whole debacle behind them. Soon after his encounter, the Flash would meet someone who would become one of his closest confidants in the superhero community, Hal Jordan, aka Green Lantern. This happened when the two crossed paths while trying to investigate a string of kidnappings. They eventually found out that the kidnapping victims, who happened to be kids, were being forced to participate in gladiatorial fights in a place called Arena World. Of course, Barry rescued the children, but unknown to him at the time, Hal actually made an agreement with the kids' handlers to take their place in Arena World's fights. A few months would pass, and Barry would meet a couple of Iris's nephews named Wallace and Wally. During this particular issue, Iris had to run off to work. She then took Wallace with her and left Wally to hang out with Barry for the day. Barry and Wally hit it off, so much so that the same accident that gave Barry his powers also happened to Wally. That is to say, the boy got hit by lightning, and like Barry, instead of getting absolutely destroyed, Wally also got super speed, which then effectively turned him into the young superhero named Kid Flash. Now, if you don't know it already, the Flash is actually one of the Justice League's founding members. However, given DC Comics' weird canon, it's pretty difficult to point out when exactly the world's greatest superheroes chose to band together and form their iconic team. Still, one of the team's earliest missions involved the Flash and the other heroes of the DCU joining forces to defeat an extraterrestrial race called the Appalachians. From there, they decided to formalize this group, officially naming it Justice League. During his own adventures, we find out that the Flash had been trying to create the cosmic treadmill in his own timeline. Another time-displaced adventure began when Barry was transported to the 25th century while messing with the device. There, the Flash met a man named Eobard Thawne. As Barry would discover, Eobard was an expert in history and a Flash superfan. In fact, Eobard's admiration of the Flash ended with him finding a way to use the Speed Force. Speed Force is the same energy that powers Barry's super speed. Eobard then used this discovery to turn himself into his own version of the Flash and started participating in superheroic activities. However, we soon find out that all of this was a big ol' lie. Barry would later find out that Eobard was actually orchestrating the same events that he'd been stopping this whole time, or more precisely, Eobard is a fake. He'd been fabricating accidents and tragedies by himself, and then swooping in to stop them to make it appear like he's a legit superhero. Eventually, Barry and Eobard ended up in a fight when the Flash confronted the Speedy historian about this. In the end, the Flash came out on top and set Eobard to prison. Although Barry didn't know it at the time, Eobard would eventually go on to become arguably his greatest nemesis, the supervillain known as the Reverse Flash. On a more personal note, Iris and Barry's relationship took another step forward. They got married and even had a honeymoon in the future. They even had kids during this period, and twins at that, Dawn and Dawn. The twins would inherit their father's powers and would become a couple of speedsters in the DCU as well, who went by the name of the Tornado Twins. Anyway, during this time, Barry and Iris' honeymoon got interrupted when he received a call from the present telling him to prepare for a world-shattering crisis event. This would later be known as the Crisis on Infinite Earths, and it's one of the most important milestones in Barry's history. You see, Barry Allen actually lost his life during the Crisis on Infinite Earths storyline, and for years in real-world time, the Flash's mantle would be held by Wally West. However, you can always trust DC to mess with their storylines. So, we ultimately find out that Barry didn't actually perish during the Crisis on Infinite Earths. Instead, it would be revealed that he just got trapped within the Speed Force. Barry's return to the DCU got off to a rocky start. For one, he eventually found out that he had been infected by an energy known as the negative speed force. In turn, this inadvertently caused him to take out the villainous Savitar. On top of that, Barry also lost all of his memories of Wally West when the supervillain Abracadabra shoved him into the Speed Force during an encounter. Abracadabra did this because he was trying to remove the world's collective memory of Wally. Now, the Flashpoint event was another status quo changing storyline for the entire DCU, and at the center of all of it was none other than Barry Allen. This arc kicked off when Barry ultimately discovered the answer to the lifelong question that's bugged him nearly all his life. Who killed Nora Allen, his mom? Barry found out that it was none other than the Reverse Flash, Eobard Thawne, who truly ended his mother's life. This prompted Barry to go back to the past in an attempt to stop Thawne from committing this heinous crime, but this didn't really work out. Instead, Barry ended up accidentally messing with the universe's timeline, creating an alternate reality with an entirely different plot. Still, Barry would be able to put his original timeline back together, well, to a certain extent. Now, the Flashpoint event was actually just a means to set up an entirely new, rebooted DC universe called the New 52. The New 52 initially served as the solution to the publisher's decade-long problems with their convoluted, near-senseless superhero canon. As such, the New 52 pretty much dialed the clock back on all DC superheroes and villains. Of course, Barry Allen was no exception to this. In the New 52, Barry was single again, and we found out that he'd been dating a woman named Patty Spivot. During this period, Barry also became acquainted with a physicist named Darman Elias, who crafted a device that could alter human DNA. One fateful day, a group of goons tried to steal Dr. Elias's invention. This prompted Barry to go after them as the Flash. Unsurprisingly, he easily thwarted the thug's plan, but he had a crisis of conscience when he mistakenly believed that he actually killed one of the criminals. To weigh more on his conscience, Barry also realized that one of the goons was a man named Manuel Lago, who also happened to be Barry's old acquaintance. On the bright side, Barry would soon find out that he wasn't responsible for Manuel's untimely demise. With the help of Dr. Elias, they then discovered that Manuel's genome had been tampered with. The plot further thickened when Barry eventually found Manuel alive and well in his apartment. However, their reunion was interrupted and even more questions were raised when Barry witnessed a group of Manuel's clones kidnap his old friend. To make matters worse, he also found out from these doppelgangers that they also took Iris West captive. And if you are wondering, no, Barry and Iris didn't end up together in this reality. Instead, she was his ex-girlfriend. Barry would soon unravel the truth behind Manuel and his clones. As it turns out, Manuel had become an agent for the CIA, where he ultimately was listed as killed in action a year ago. As for the clones, we discover that they're a group who call themselves Mob Rule. Now, Mob Rule were indeed genetic clones of Manuel, but they were imperfect. Specifically, each clone was experiencing rapid cell deterioration. In order to cure this, Mob Rule sought out the progenitor, the original Manuel. The Flash then seemingly perished during his encounter with Mob Rule, while Manuel willingly gave himself up to his clones out of guilt. But we soon find out that Barry didn't actually lose his life. The more concerning, however, is the fact that Mob Rule also kidnapped Dr. Elias and forced him to help come up with a cure for their cell deterioration. Ultimately, Dr. Elias agreed and OG Manuel volunteered to use his own DNA to help cure his clones. However, it went badly. In the end, the Flash was forced to intervene when Dr. Elias's procedure went haywire. Although Barry was able to save OG Manuel, each and every one of his clones lost their lives. This resulted in Manuel resenting the Flash. Not long after that adventure, Dr. Elias would let Barry know that his powers were causing time rifts in reality. To prevent this from happening, the physicist invented a tool that would help Barry gauge and regulate his speed to prevent him from opening any more time rifts. While this was happening, an incarcerated criminal named Leonard Snart had just escaped Iron Heights prison. Afterward, Leonard found out that the life support system of his hospitalized sister, Lisa, had been on the fritz because of the power outage that the Flash caused during his battle with Mob Rule. Because of this, Lisa was now in critical condition. This prompted Leonard to blame the Flash for what happened to his sister. So, with his newly discovered cryogenic abilities, Leonard drew out the Scarlet Speedster and started to throw down with him. During this battle, Barry accidentally opened a time rift using his super speed, which then sucked Iris and a number of other people in. There is a bright side to all this though, because Barry eventually learned what happened to Lisa and took it upon himself to make sure that she got the medical care she needed. Soon after, the Flash went on to try and rescue Iris. To do that, Barry went into the Speed Force. However, his rescue mission was interrupted when he came across a guy named Roscoe Hines. The Flash found out that Roscoe had been trapped in the Speed Force for a long time. But more importantly, he also learned that Roscoe was involved in the power outage that occurred in the city, which set off a chain of events that led to the Flash's troubles. Finding out about this made Barry lose his temper, so he attacked Roscoe. But another misadventure occurred when the two accidentally found themselves entering another rift. When they reached the other side, Barry and Roscoe found themselves in Gorilla City. Gorilla City had just crowned its new ruler, Grodd, and upon arriving there, we also discover that Barry had lost his memory. Grodd initially wanted to literally eat Barry, but Gorilla City's Elder Council advised against it. According to them, Barry was a messenger. On top of that, they told Barry a prophecy that stated he was going to be the Speed Force's conduit and that Barry was destined to run for all of mankind. Now, while all this was unfolding, Grodd just grew increasingly more concerned and envious of Barry's abilities. This culminated in a fight between the two, where Barry came out on top and regained his memories. Afterward, Gorilla City's elders sent the Flash to his original timeline, but the hits just kept on coming, as Barry immediately found out that Dr. Elias had been protesting against the Flash as soon as he got home. One important thing to mention here is that Barry Allen was believed to be dead ever since he fought Leonard, so he decided to keep the ruse going by moving to Keystone City. There, he started working at a dive bar that usually hosted some of his villains. Eventually, Barry decided to take matters into his own hands and bring his foes to justice as the Flash. Lisa Snart, who had since dubbed herself the Golden Glider, would then help the Flash's villains escape custody. Curiously enough, she saved each and every one of them except for her own brother, Leonard. During this period, Barry also found out that Dr. Elias' sudden turn against the Flash stems from the fact that he was only trying to use the speedster to further his own agenda. Specifically, he went on a smear campaign against the Flash to secure his position as the city's hero. In addition to that, Dr. Elias went on a crusade against any and all masked criminals, which eventually led to the Flash being framed for a crime that he didn't commit. This happened when Golden Glider attacked Dr. Elias just when he was about to make a public announcement. In the middle of all the chaos that ensued, Lisa's team called the Rogues also managed to steal Dr. Elias' monorail and hide it in Mirror Master's dimension. We then get the reveal that it was Dr. Elias who originally gave Leonard, Lisa, and the rest of the Rogues their powers. It happened more than a year ago when Dr. Elias used his human genome resequencer on them. As you'd expect, things didn't work out well, as Lisa had been left in a coma after that, while her lover, Sam Scudder, got trapped in the mirror dimension. In the present, the Rogues were now operating without their former leader, Leonard, so he decided to team up with the Flash instead to confront his old villainous enemies. The two got the better of the Rogues, after which Leonard turned on Barry. But just as Captain Cold was about to celebrate his victory, the city was attacked by an army from Gorilla City led by none other than Grodd. To combat this new threat, the Flash decided to put his beef with the Rogues on hold and start a temporary team-up with them. The Rogues then fended off the Simian army, while Barry himself confronted Grodd. The Flash would soon find out that Grodd jacked himself up with energy from the Speed Force, as the villainous ape brought the beatdown on Barry. But just as Grodd was about to kill him, a gorilla named Solivar intervened and rescued the Flash. But this whole adventure doesn't end there. In the ensuing chaos, Patty ultimately learned that Barry and the Flash were the same person. They then retreated to the house of Malaya, Manuel's mom. There, Barry had visions of all the alternate futures that might happen because of his fight with Grodd. Alarmingly, Barry discovered that each and every possible future would end up with Patty either losing her life or becoming heavily injured. So, to avoid this, Barry decided to give himself up to the Gorilla Army's leader. Barry and Patty would say their final goodbyes shortly after this, and he'd head straight for Grodd. They ended up confronting each other in Dr. Elias' facility, where Barry had the plan to transport himself and Grodd into the Speed Force. But before this could happen, a tank suddenly entered the scene. Curiously, Iris was the one driving it. Realizing that Iris and the other people who got trapped in the Speed Force were now at arm's reach, Barry decided to end his duel with Grodd by sicking a mammoth on the guy and sending him deep into the Speed Force. The Flash then helped Iris and her companions reach Central City. Soon after that, the Flash would learn that Central City PD had driven away Grodd's army, effectively ending the so-called Guerrilla War. Later, Barry paid Iris a visit and learned that she didn't have any memory of her time in the Speed Force. It wouldn't take long for Barry to find out that the people he rescued from the Speed Force brought something strange with them. To be specific, the Flash learned that everyone he saved had also gained super speed. A bit of normalcy, though, finally arrived in Barry's life when he and Patty decided to live together. Plus, he started working for the authorities again as an archivist for the police. But as superhero stories tend to go, peace is short-lived. Not long after settling into his new job and home life, Patty informed her boyfriend that someone had been taking out the people he rescued from the Speed Force. The Flash went on to investigate the matter and eventually discovered that Kid Flash might be the one responsible for this. Now, just to clear something up, Kid Flash isn't Wally West in the New 52 reality. Instead, it's a boy from the 30th century named Bar-Tor. The Flash, thinking that Kid Flash might be the perp he's been looking for, went after Bar to get to the bottom of things. But in the end, he got nothing out of the boy, as his superhero team, the Teen Titans, intervened. Afterward, Barry took it up himself to protect Iris from his new villain, who went by the name of the Speed Force Killer. Their investigation into the matter ultimately led Barry, Iris, and Patty to Dr. Elias, and during this encounter, the Flash arrived just in the nick of time to see the Speed Force Killer about to set himself on Dr. Elias. This led to a duel between the Flash and the Speed Force Killer. During it, we discovered that the supervillain had been planning on basically absorbing all of the Speed Force within himself. In the end, Barry ended up losing his abilities when the Speed Force Killer successfully siphoned it off of him. But here's the real shocker. The true identity of the Speed Force Killer turns out to be Daniel West, Iris' own brother. And not long after, Daniel went to the past to try and take out his and Iris' dad. However, the Flash eventually stopped him by managing to take back the stolen Speed Force energy. He then sent Daniel back to the present where the so-called Speed Force Killer was finally brought to justice. At this point, the Flash decided to also end things with Dr. Elias, given that the guy has basically become a scummy politician. More interestingly, Barry chose to reopen a cold case that's been troubling him for nearly his whole life, the one about his mother. Like I said earlier, the New 52 was pretty much a reboot for the entire DCU, so in this reality, Barry hasn't learned the truth behind his mom's true assailant yet. However, before Barry could learn anything about that, he found himself in yet another time-hopping adventure that culminated with the Flash getting trapped inside the Speed Force again. While he was trapped, a version of himself from the future took up his role as the Flash in his original timeline. And believe me when I say that future Barry did a number on OG Barry's personal life. For one, future Barry managed to completely ruin Barry's relationship with Patty. On top of that, future Barry had a more violent approach to dealing with the city's criminals, which led to the people thinking that the Flash had gone overboard with his vigilante efforts. In the end though, OG Barry was able to return to his original timeline and defeat future Barry. But the damage has been done already and the public opinion of the Flash was at an all-time low. But if there was one silver lining here, it's this. Before future Barry met his end, he told OG Barry that he failed to find out the true perpetrator behind Nora's death. However, future Barry did inform OG Barry that he discovered a possible lead, which came in the form of a single name, Thawne. Upon learning about this, Barry visited his father in jail. Henry started to freak out when his son mentioned the name Thawne. Shortly after, the Flash was out on patrol when he noticed a yellow streak run past him. Soon after, Henry actually broke out of prison and orchestrated a mugging to catch the Flash's attention, since he had no clue that his son and the Scarlet Speedster were the same person. And more importantly, Henry revealed that Nora was taken out by a man called Eobard Thawne. Eventually, we discovered that the yellow streak from earlier was none other than Thawne himself, who has started to call himself Zoom. When the Flash tried to confront Zoom, he learned that Zoom had weird followers who pretty much worshipped him. These followers, known as acolytes, then attacked the Flash, while Zoom made Henry craft a glove that would help him steal someone's powers. He then used this glove on one of his acolytes, Bagali, which made all of his other followers turn on him. The Flash quickly destroyed Zoom's glove, which forced him to retreat, but not before kidnapping Henry. He then took Barry's dad back through time and right to the house the Allens once called home. It's here that Henry would discover that the Scarlet Speedster and his son are one and the same. In a particularly sinister moment, Zoom would also reveal that he had forced Henry to take the blame for Nora's demise, all in a sick attempt to mess with the Flash. And if this wasn't bad enough, we also find out that Eobard's reason for taking out Nora was just so that he and Barry could pretty much have the same life experiences. You see, Eobard's dad actually took his wife's life, and, well, Eobard just wanted to make Barry have that same trauma. Still, it all worked out in the end as Barry managed to finally defeat Zoom. The Flash was in for a rather lethal ride in his next adventure. You see, the Dreadlord of Apocalypse, Darkseid, was beefing hard with the cosmic entity called the Anti-Monitor during this period. So Darkseid would summon the entity called the Black Racer, which is pretty much one of the DCU's personifications of death, in order to get an edge over his adversary. However, the Anti-Monitor pulled one over on Darkseid by freeing the Black Racer from Darkseid's control. The Anti-Monitor then forced Barry and the Black Racer to fuse together, effectively turning the Flash into an avatar of death. And, as the Black Racer, Barry would take out Darkseid. Now, that might all seem well and good, right? That is until you find out that the Black Racer won't get out of Barry's body afterward. So, to separate the two entities, Alexander Luthor Jr. had to step in and use his powers to free Barry from the Black Racer's hold. And so, we enter another epoch in Barry's life as well as the DCU at large. This happened during the DC Rebirth initiative, which pretty much came as a way to fix the New 52's plot. Suffice it to say that DC Comics cherry-picked elements from both the New 52 and the pre-New 52 era of their fictional universe in an attempt to make the DCU as coherent as possible. Continuing with the story, Darkseid's demise caused a rift in the Speed Force, which retconned Wally West again. You see, in the New 52, Wally West never came the proper successor to Barry Allen. However, in this revamped continuity, we find out that Wally had been trapped in the Speed Force for a decade. Ultimately, Barry was able to regain all of his memories of Wally and rescue his protege. Afterward, the Flash and Batman started working together to investigate a certain entity that seemed to be targeting them. Now, we won't be going too much into detail about this particular story thread, but all you need to know is that DC Comics was absolutely scraping the barrel at this point. And that is to say, they decided to introduce characters from Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' all-time classic Watchmen graphic novel to the main DCU timeline. And as for the case the Flash and Batman were working on, it involved Watchmen's iconic smiley face button. This specific story thread would end up opening a whole can of worms involving cosmic experimentation and conspiracies. Soon after, Barry would gain a new crime-fighting buddy in the form of Detective August Hart, who happened to gain super speed after being hit by lightning, similar to Barry. But here's the thing, during this time, even more randoms from around the city got super speed when a Speed Force storm struck them. So the Flash tried to do some damage control and gathered as many of the new speedsters as possible. With the help of Mina Dawn, a scientist from Star Labs, the Flash was able to assist these new speedsters to become acclimated to their powers. Oh, Barry and Mina also started dating each other. This relationship would be short-lived though, as a new super-fast villain named Godspeed emerged and started taking out these newly born speedsters and absorbing their energy. In fact, Mina ended up as one of Godspeed's victims, since she had also gained powers when she was struck by the same Speed Force storm. And not long after, it would be revealed that Godspeed was actually none other than August Hart. He basically went power mad when he realized he could absorb other people's Speed Force energy. To put a stop to him, the remaining speedsters willingly gave up their powers to Barry and Wally. Unsurprisingly, just as one, as the two Scarlet Speedsters sent Godspeed to jail. Now, what you should know about this revamped DCU is that there's another Kid Flash in this world, named Wallace West. If you remember, Wallace was originally introduced as Wally's biological brother, but DC retconned their world yet again, and this time Wally and Wallace were actually cousins. You should also know that at this point, Iris still had no idea that Wally had come back to their world. Yeah, I know, it's confusing, but that's DC for ya. Anyway, when Barry tried to convince Wally to reveal his existence to Iris, he rebuffed it. According to him, they first had to find out the source of the so-called mysterious entity that's been targeting them, the same one that Barry and Batman had been investigating earlier. Oh, and after a long while, we finally got to see Barry and Iris start dating again. Soon, we finally got some development in Barry and Batman's investigation when the Dark Knight contacted him one day. Batman informed the Flash that he discovered a strange energy signature coming from the button pin they found when Wally returned from the Speed Force. However, when the Flash arrived to meet Batman in the Batcave, he was shocked to find that Bruce had been heavily wounded by someone. But more alarming was the fact that the lifeless body of Eobard Thawne, Reverse Flash, was lying right beside him. Now, this is quite the mystery. Barry then decided to delve deeper into the mystery of this button by going into the Speed Force using the cosmic treadmill. And hey, Batman even joined him on this quest. They then got a big shocker when they suddenly got transported to the Flashpoint timeline. You know, the reality that Barry accidentally created and thought he had erased, which then paved the way for the New 52. There they met Flashpoint's version of Batman, Thomas Wayne. We won't go deeper onto this, since we're talking about Barry Allen primarily, but all you need to know is that in the Flashpoint timeline, Bruce Wayne was gone and the one who took up the cowl was his dad, Thomas Wayne. His mom, Martha, was this reality's Joker, but that's a story for another day. In the end, both he and Batman witnessed this timeline getting erased from all of reality just as they hopped back on the cosmic treadmill to continue their investigation. They ended up going through the time stream again, and this time encountered the Reverse Flash before he died in the Batcave. Reverse Flash told the two that he knew who the button connected to, and even though Barry tried to stop him from dying, he wasn't able to do it. Now, remember that whole deal about the button from Watchmen? It turns out that it was all connected to Dr. Manhattan and his attempts at basically altering the DCU's entire history. But like we said earlier, this whole can of worms deserves a video all its own. Eventually, the Flash and Batman were able to go back to their original timeline with the help of Jay Garrick, who happens to be the first ever Flash, aka the Golden Age Flash. And now, Jay and Barry have a long history with each other, dating back to the Silver Age of comics. But in this current continuity, Barry had no idea who Jay was. Not long after, Barry started to have suspicions about Eobard. According to him, his arch-nemesis was still alive. This was confirmed when he eventually discovered that Eobard had kidnapped Iris and taken her to the future. So he soon pursued the Reverse Flash to the 25th century. There, Iris learned that Barry was the Flash when Eobard beat and unmasked him right in front of her. We then find out that Eobard was actually only trying to prevent an alternate future where Barry and Iris's kids would become powerful forces of evil. To save Iris, Barry made a deal with Eobard to send her back to their original timeline in exchange for him getting trapped in the negative Speed Force. Eobard agreed to this, but we soon found out that he had no plans of honoring his word. After sending Barry to the negative Speed Force, he tried to kill Iris. This then prompted Barry to re-emerge and fend off his arch-nemesis. However, his exposure to the negative Speed Force turned Barry into the Negative Flash, which is basically an evil, more violent version of himself. This was on full display when Barry brought the beatdown on Eobard. Instead of trading blows with the Flash, Eobard then tried to worm his way out of the situation by convincing Barry that they were friends, and even going so far as to offer the Scarlet Speedster a partnership with him. Of course, Barry was not hearing any of this. In the end, he sent the Reverse Flash back to the future and even removed his powers. And just to make sure Eobard stayed down, Iris finished the job and took him out. She and Barry went back to the present where the revelations from their recent adventure caused a crack in their relationship. For a time, Barry would operate within Central City as the Negative Flash, where he'd encounter foes like Bloodwork along the way. But the Scarlet Speedster would eventually regain his OG Speed Force abilities after some time. This happened when his old friend Mina used some good old-fashioned comic book science to remove the negative Speed Force from Barry's body and transfer it to herself. Shortly after regaining his powers, DC would have its Dark Knight's Metal storyline, where the Flash would come face-to-face with the Red Death, a superbly evil speedster version of Batman from Earth 52. Barry got absolutely mauled by the Red Death, but Vic Stone, aka Cyborg, rescued our guy before things got any worse. Afterward, Barry would help Wally finally reconnect with Iris. Everything seemed to be going the Flash's way at this point, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. Soon after, a group of law enforcement agents from the 25th century called the Renegades arrived in the present to try and arrest Iris for taking out Eobard. This kicked off another dimension-hopping adventure where Wally eventually met the villainous Hunter Zolomon. Hunter then told Wally that there were other people trapped within the Speed Force the same way he had been, and in order to free them, Wally had to destroy the Speed Force itself. Wally believed Hunter's story and attempted to do just that. Barry, on the other hand, thought otherwise. To him, Hunter had just poisoned Wally's mind with his lies. The two Flashes ended up chasing each other across the globe, and not even the Justice League could stop their speedy squabble. Barry and Wally's speed inadvertently caused a problem in the Speed Force, which then allowed Hunter to reveal his true intentions. He revealed that he lied to Wally and basically orchestrated everything in order for the two Flashes to break the Speed Force. This allowed Hunter to augment his ability by adapting a couple of new energies called the Strength Force and Sage Force to his body. Hunter then attempted to rewrite reality with his newfound powers, but Barry and Wally managed to stop him. In the aftermath, the Speed Force was altered, which forbade any and all speedsters from using it to travel time. The Flash would next team up with Aquaman and Wonder Woman as they battled against a Legion of Doom. During this adventure, Barry faced off with Grodd again, who had recently gained powers from the Still Force, which is pretty much the opposite of the Speed Force. Grodd's plan was to release a primordial cosmic entity known as Umbrax to the multiverse, but with the help of Green Lantern, John Stewart, and the Martian Manhunter, Barry was able to stop Umbrax's arrival. The Flash would next meet up with John Stewart in a time-hopping quest to stop Lex Luthor from fully reawakening the super celestial Perpetua. Soon, the two found themselves being flung to the 20th century thanks to a chaotic situation that happened with a portal. Still, the two heroes had a mission. Barry and John had to acquire an artifact called the Totality in the fight against Luthor and Perpetua. But during their time in the not-so-distant past, Barry would meet the Justice Society of America along with DC Comics' first ever Flash, Jay Garrick. By the time they finished this time-jumping quest, Barry and John were able to retrieve the Totality and bring it to the present in hopes of foiling Lex's plans. Unfortunately, the Flash and the Justice League took an L when Perpetua attacked. In fact, they were only rescued when the Quintessence, which are pretty much the elder beings of the DC multiverse, appeared. The Quintessence then tasked Barry and the Justice League to go on another adventure in order to collect something called anti-crisis energy that would put a stop to Perpetua. However, when they got back to Earth, the Flash and his fellow heroes were shocked to discover that Perpetua and the Batman Who Laughs had teamed up. What's worse is that the Batman Who Laughs pretty much terraformed the Earth and turned it into the Metalverse, which is pretty much a dark version of the world. Now, guys, as with that whole deal with the smiley face button, the whole Metalverse saga is yet another storyline that deserves a whole discussion on its own. In a nutshell, the Metalverse was just this temporary universe meant to be a part of DC Comics' attempt at trying to bring some much-needed coherence to their fictional universe. As such, it eventually led to the entire DCU being restored to its original state. And by original state, we mean DC Comics decided to retcon their world yet again and include most of the story elements and details for their characters before the Flashpoint event. And not long after though, Barry would discover some shocking news from Booster Gold when he told him that Wally West perished during a riot at the Sanctuary. Barry then went into the Speed Force to check if Wally was there, but instead, he ended up confronting his old enemy, Godspeed. In the end, Barry gave Godspeed a beating before telling Iris about the tragic news. Iris took some time for herself after learning about what happened to Wally. Barry then rekindled his relationship with Wallace West and Avery Ho, another speedster in the DCU. However, soon after, the personification of death for speedsters, Black Flash, would emerge and try to take out many Speed Force users in the world. Barry learned about this and was successful in saving a couple of his allies, Freza and Steadfast, from the Black Flash, but the Dark Runner was able to claim the life of another vigilante named Psyche. Soon after, Barry and Iris received a message from Barry's future self, telling them about an impending threat called Paradox. This prompted the Flash to investigate Paradox. Sometime later, Godspeed re-emerged and told Barry to stop looking for this mysterious villain. But in that exact moment, Paradox revealed himself just as Barry was getting ready to chase down Godspeed. In a surprising turn of events, we find out that Godspeed was actually secretly helping Barry. You see, Paradox had promised Godspeed that he would help him find information about his brother, Jorge. Ultimately though, Godspeed chose to side with Barry, so he tried to help the Scarlet Speedster fend off Paradox. This didn't end well though, as he got soundly beaten. Not long after, Barry found out from Iris that the only way to stop Paradox was to have Eobard Thawne defeat him. So, Barry set out on another timeline-hopping adventure to go and look for his old nemesis. And to do this, the Flash visited a point in time when he was sure Eobard would show up, the night of Nora's demise. As you'd expect, the Flash and Reverse Flash had an old-fashioned fistfight before Eobard learned about Paradox and agreed to help. So, both Eobard and Barry then traveled to the future to acquire the Reverse Flash's lightning rod, which would help him take out Paradox. And props to Eobard, because he actually stuck to his word. After acquiring the lightning rod, he and Barry went back to the present and Eobard decided to take out Chris, who happened to be the man who would eventually become Paradox. But Barry didn't like this idea, so he and Eobard just ended up fighting each other again. All of a sudden, Paradox appeared and proceeded to take care of Chris himself. Eobard tried to go for one last-ditch effort to take down this villain using his lightning rod, but it didn't work. Paradox then used his powers to get rid of the time stream, which caused a time storm. Barry and Godspeed would join forces to fend off Paradox during the time storm, while Eobard made sure that Chris would never turn into Paradox at all. It all worked out and Paradox was erased from reality. And hey, Eobard even came out as a good guy here. However, he immediately abandoned his good guy act and proceeded to absolutely flatline Godspeed right after they defeated Paradox. And to add insult to injury, Eobard even revealed that he was the one who took Jorge's life in the past, who was Godspeed's brother. This was enough for Barry to realize that he needed to permanently take out Eobard if he wanted the guy to stop messing with him and his loved ones. So, during his next adventure, the Flash would face off against the Legion of Zoom, a supervillain team that Eobard founded made up of the Flash's various rogues. Knowing what he had to do to stop Eobard, Barry first made arrangements to ensure that his friends and family were kept as far away from Eobard and his goons as possible. After that, Barry rushed to his old house where he was confronted by evil versions of his children from a different future. The Legion of Zoom then jumped the Flash, while Eobard revealed himself and proceeded to take control of Barry's body. The next thing Barry knew, he was inside the Speed Force again. And if that wasn't bad enough, he had to defend himself against evil versions of his friends, Jesse Quick and Max Mercury. Ultimately, the Flash escaped and successfully took back control of his body. On top of that, Barry even rescued both Jesse and Max from the Speed Force in order to help him against Eobard and his crew. A grueling fight between the two factions erupted once they got back to the real world, with Eobard pretty much taking credit for all of the misfortunes that had recently happened to Barry. According to him, he did all this with the help of the negative Speed Force. In the middle of their battle, Wally West suddenly emerged and called for Barry to come look for him, before suddenly disappearing. Right after that, Barry chased down Eobard through the time stream with the intention of finally ending his arch-nemesis' life. However, instead of doing that, Barry proved to be a real hero and chose to forgive his arch-villain. He did this by changing the timeline so that Eobard would never become the Reverse Flash. He then went back to the present and witnessed that the timeline had been fixed, and the Flash was again free to operate as a superhero without worrying about his greatest enemy. Now, remember Perpetua and the Batman Who Laughs? Yeah, the Flash set his sights on these villains next. Specifically, Barry tried to travel to the past in order to prevent Perpetua and the Batman Who Laughs from ever gaining power, but this ended up blowing in Barry's face, as his connection to the Speed Force weakened. Later, he met with a couple of other Flashes, Jay and Wally. Now, you might be wondering, how in the world is Wally alive? The thing is, Wally didn't really die back at the Sanctuary. In truth, he faked his own demise with a bit of time-traveling shenanigans, and about that riot that Booster Gold told Barry about? Yeah, that didn't happen either. It was actually Wally who flatlined all those patients when he experienced a sudden Speed Force surge. However, Wally had experienced changes since he last saw him, because now he was the one in command of the powerful artifact called the Mobius Chair. The rest of the heroes came up with an idea to rebuild the multiverse that Perpetua and the Batman Who Laughs twisted by having Wally use the Mobius Chair in conjunction with Crisis Energy. As for the Batman Who Laughs, he actually gained a power-up and dubbed himself the Darkest Knight. Soon, the Darkest Knight caught the Flash and his friends in his crosshairs, so a high-speed chase ensued. They eventually escaped the Darkest Knight's clutches and reunited with the rest of their allies. During this story's climax, Barry helped Wally stop the Darkest Knight by giving all his Speed Force energy to his protege. In the end, Wally was able to fulfill his mission and hand over the Mobius Chair to Wonder Woman. They then use it to defeat the Darkest Knight and remake the DC multiverse. Now, the Infinite Frontier was yet another DCU revamp that shook things up for all its heroes and villains. Of course, as you'd expect from DC, they did this by pretty much cherry-picking storylines and arcs from the past. In this newly revamped reality, Barry and Iris were married again, and all their memories from before the Flashpoint event were restored. In a romantic twist, the two decided to renew their vows. Barry would then formally pass on the mantle of the Flash to Wally West after he got drafted to become a part of Justice Incarnate, a group dedicated to mapping out the new multiverse. During his exploits in the multiverse, Barry found himself entering an entirely different world called Earth Omega. There, he discovered the lifeless bodies of the Quintessence before being attacked by the villainous Psycho Pirate. Psycho Pirate then told Barry that, surprise surprise, another crisis was headed his way. But more surprisingly, he also told Barry that he would be the one who would help cause it. Shortly after, Psycho Pirate captured Barry and strapped him to a huge turbine. He then fed him the illusion that he was running to rescue all of the multiverse. In truth though, Barry was unknowingly helping Darkseid by gathering energy through the turbine, which would help the Lord of Apocalypse crack the multiverse open and acquire energies from beyond it. Eventually, President Superman rescued Barry from captivity, and the next thing he knew, Barry was inside a different multiverse called Multiverse 2, a ravaged reality with barely any life. There, Barry met Pariah, who told him that he knew a method that could finally stop DC's crisis events. Like other people who have dropped out of reading DC Comics, Pariah was simply tired of mega events that usually revolved around realities getting wrecked and rebooted. Pariah then sent Barry to a pocket dimension called Earth Flash 1, a place where he could find peace and happiness. Eventually, Justice Incarnate tried to extract Barry from Earth Flash 1 only to find out that he had no recollection of them. They soon found out that Earth Flash 1 was actually a fake reality formed by the primordial force known as the Great Darkness, which prompted Justice Incarnate to quickly get out of there without even rescuing Barry. Of course, Justice Incarnate wasn't just gonna leave their friend hanging, they just needed to retreat in order to come up with a plan. So, not long after escaping the fake dimension, they teamed up with Earth Zero's Justice League in order to find a way to stop the Great Darkness and save Barry. Although this joint task force managed to prevent the Great Darkness from entering their reality, they lost a number of Leaguers along the way. In fact, only Black Adam seemed to survive the encounter. So he went back to Earth Zero and reported everything he witnessed to the rest of the world's superheroes. It was at this point that Wally found out what happened to Barry, so he took it upon himself to gather the rest of their speedster friends to help look for the man. Wally would ultimately locate Barry on Earth Flash 1, but there was a problem. Barry's senses had been altered so much that he thought Wally was actually Eobard Thawne. This caused Barry to lash out and attempt to kill Wally. To Wally's credit, he eventually subdued his old mentor without serious physical harm, and when Barry got his act together, he was able to deduce that all the other members of the Justice League aren't dead and are only trapped in their own fake realities. With this information, Barry then ordered his friends to go back to Earth Zero and defend it from any incoming threats. As for Barry, he took off to search for the other heroes that were trapped. Eventually, Barry and the rest of the DC heroes managed to regroup and defeat the Great Darkness. Sometime later, Iris and Barry were having dinner when time seemed to just stop, freezing any non-speedster around. Barry then witnessed a large structure arriving on Earth. This structure is owned by an evil coalition called the Fraction. Now, the Fraction was an empire of interdimensional raiders who took power from the Speed Force to conquer other worlds. Things took a turn for the worse when Barry failed to save Iris's life when the Fraction structure caused a massive quake in the city. With his wife gone, Barry could only grieve. However, there was no time for that, as the Fraction started attacking everyone, and it was up to the Flash and his allies to stop them. So, Barry and Wally ran, with the Flash carrying his wife's lifeless body as they retreated to the West residence. After mourning Iris, Barry and the rest of the Flash family came up with a plan to defeat the Fraction. When all was said and done, Barry and the rest of the other superheroic speedsters not only defeated the Fraction, but made sure to undo all the damage they caused. This included bringing Iris back to life along with the other casualties of this so-called 1-minute war. I mean, you didn't actually think Iris would stay dead, did you? The last time we meet Barry Allen, at least for now, is during the Absolute Power storyline. And well, things didn't seem to be going too well for the Flash there. That's because Barry sacrificed his Speed Force powers to prevent Amanda Waller from sicking her multiversal army against their world's heroes. With that, Barry lost his connection to the Speed Force, and not only that, but he and the rest of the other speedsters had been rendered unable to travel the multiverse after the events of Absolute Power. And that, guys, is the full story of Barry Allen.